Good morning, and thank you for joining the next session in our look at the High Holy Days. Not recording? It is recording. You said it's recording. I've just got a slight problem here for my assistant causing me aggravation. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, last week we looked at the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and it was a bit of a there was a lot to cover, too much to cover in 1 week, so I missed out quite a bit. But I will today concentrate on the second day. And again, if there are things that you want me to look at that I'm not going to have time to today, let me know. And then next week we'll probably have a break because it's just a couple of days before Rosh Hashanah. Is that right? No, sorry, next week we will look at Yom Kippur, and then the following week will be just before Rosh Hashanah. Tonight, if you look out the window, you will see a full moon, beautiful full moon. As you may have seen last night, it was a glorious moon, and that is telling us all that it's the 15th of the month, halfway through the Jewish month, or the 14th, 15th, and that Rosh Hashanah will be in another 2 weeks. And that, of course, works out Friday night, 2 weeks' time. So this is what I want to try and get through today, talking about the second day of Rosh Hashanah. It's the extra bits that we don't say on the first day this year. This is quite different because it's Shabbat. And I want to look at the following. Look at the laning, look at the Haftorah, look at the shofar blowing, have a look at Avinu Malkeinu, and if we have time to have a bit of an in-depth look at Unatane Tokef, and then ending up with some of the customs that we follow on Rosh Hashanah. There's quite a lot of them. And then a final summary for those of us that, for those of us, we don't know what's going to be happening, who are going to be davening on our own at home. What are the important things to do? Okay, that's what we're going to do. So first of all, let's have a look at the second day. Why have we got a second day? If you remember last week, we looked at where it was. We looked at the Torah and we discovered that Rosh Hashanah, it doesn't even get a mention, and the only thing it tells us to do is to do some blowing, a day of blowing, and also have some sacrifices. And we have to go to the book of Nehemiah to find out what happened many years later when there was the first sort of Rosh Hashanah that we're a bit used to. So in the Torah, of course, just like all the other festivals, we're only told about the first day and the second day, Yom Tov, that we have on Rosh Hashanah in Israel and all over the world on every other festival, except for Yom Kippur. We just need to remind ourselves why we have the second day. And if you remember, if you've heard it before, that in the original days when the months and the festivals were worked out, it wasn't done in advance on computer like it is now. It was done by observation, and people would look out the window, and when they saw the new moon, the beginning of the new moon, they would know that the new month had already started. So for most festivals, that worked out okay, because if you see the new moon on the 1st or the 2nd of the month, then you know it is the 1st or 2nd of the month. And for example, for Pesach, Shavuot, you've got 15 days to spread the word and make sure everyone knows about it, so that those festivals are celebrated on the right day. And they used to do that by bonfires on the tops of hills, sending the message, until people used to send out false bonfires and mucked up that system. So then they had messengers that were sent. Once the witnesses saw the new moon, the messengers were sent all around Israel and even outside Israel to tell everybody that it's the month has started. You can start counting. So the problem was then on Rosh Hashanah, when you see the new moon, it's already too late, because that means it's already the first day of Tishrei, and you can guess or which is what they have to do. You have to estimate when Rosh Hashanah should be, but you have to keep a second day because it may well be that the first day that you already kept is not actually the right one because the new moon wasn't spotted. Well, since then, things have come on a long way, and the rabbis worked out a fixed calendar, and you can look centuries ahead to see what's going to happen. But of course, in accordance with the normal tradition of Judaism, once you've got something established, a nice custom's been established, or a nice rule, then we don't like to change it. So we keep our 2 days Rosh Hashanah, and we know that at least one of them is right. And the rabbis tell us that the Rosh Hashanah itself is really, for many purposes, treated as one long day, 1 day of Rosh Hashanah that happens to last for 48 hours. So yes, and one other thing just to point out to you is there's a little mnemonic to remember which day of the week can the first day of Rosh Hashanah be. Because not every day of the week can the first day of Rosh Hashanah be. And the little mnemonic is Lo Adu Rosh, Lo Badu Pesach. So that means Lo can't be what? Adu is the letters Aleph, Daled, and Vav. Which are the days of the week? Aleph is number 1, that's Sunday. So the first day of Rosh Hashanah can't be on a Sunday. Daled is day number 4, which is Wednesday. The first day of Rosh Hashanah can't be on a Wednesday. And Vav is Friday. Rosh Hashanah, first day can't be on a Friday. Okay, it can be on any other day, the other 4 days. And the second part is Lo Badu Pesach. And Badu stands for Bet, which is the second day of the week, which is a Monday. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday can never be the first day of Pesach. So that's just something for you to try and remember to work out what day Rosh Hashanah and Pesach can fall. So let's move on. First thing then is just a revision, and we discovered last week, if you remember, that Rosh Hashanah is built on three main pillars, really. There's 3 aspects to it, which are shown in our prayers throughout. The first aspect is remembering. So we remember some of the important events that happened in the beginning of Judaism, and we look back ourselves at what people did in the original days, and we also ask God to remember what he promised, because he made lots of suggestions to our ancestors and promises, and we want him to keep them, which he's sort of done that, really, because we're still here, but there's been a lot of hiatuses in between. So the first, remembering the past in order to get a good future. The second element is kingship, all to do with God being our king. And we mentioned last week that it's a different sort of king from what we're used to. It's a king with absolute power, which is what used to happen in England in days gone by. The king said something, off with his head. You remember that phrase? It happened. Absolute power. So that's the king that we're thinking about when we talk about God on Rosh Hashanah. And the third pillar of Rosh Hashanah that we deal with is the shofar, the sounding of the horn, which is, we also looked at the fact that that's connected to kingship, because every time a king was anointed, that was accompanied by shofar blowing. So they're the three things. And I want to have a look at the laning, because I think it's one of the nicest or most interesting, not necessarily a nice story, it's a bit of an evil story, but it's quite a good one. And we all learned it when we were toddlers or at Cheder, and here it has pride of place on Rosh Hashanah. And last week we learned on the first day, we the laning that we do, we get the Sefer Torah out, we look at the beginning of this story, we set the scene, that's all we do. We set the scene and we know that Abraham and Sarah have having their new baby called Yitzchak. But everything gets going this week. Now, if you just give me a few seconds, we're going to try and do a little screen share. And we're going to try and find the laning. So that's not what we want. Is it going to come up? I have to stop and start again. Oh, they do need to improve their screen share facility, I think. Right, we should be there now. Okay, we're there. So it says, and it came to pass after all these things that God tested Abraham, and he said, Abraham, and he said, here I am. So Abraham is now used to speaking to God, and he doesn't have surprise. He just says, yep, I'm here. But now he gets a bit surprised because God says, take your son, and this is your only son. You chucked out the other one, Ishmael. You really love him. Yes, that's the one, Isaac. And go to the land of Moriah, and I want you to offer him up for burnt offering on one of the mountains. Really? Well, we don't hear anything. Abraham doesn't go into Sarah, his wife, in the next bedroom and say, maybe in the same bedroom, I don't know. Sarah, what do I do? Last time he asked Sarah what he should do regarding Hagar and Ishmael, but he doesn't tell Sarah, he doesn't ask Sarah, he doesn't discuss it with anyone. He just gets up early in the morning and he puts gets saddled on his donkey and off they go with Isaac. Isaac also just follows along. We don't know if Isaac is 3, if he's 13, if he's 33, different ages. It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. And they went for 3 days. It's quite a long journey, really. And he said to his 2 young men who'd come with, you wait here and we're going to go and do a bit of prostrating, bowing down, and then we'll come back to you. So he doesn't mention anything about the real purpose of the journey. Abraham had put on the donkey some wood, and he also had some matches or whatever they used in those days, and a knife. If he did that in Jerusalem, he would be instantly shot by the security forces. But there we were, he was in the middle of nowhere, so they couldn't see. And off they went. And then Isaac, who obviously was old enough to talk, he said, Dad, and again, Abraham says, here I am, my son. This is his general words. So yes, he says, here I am. So Isaac said, look, I can see the matches and I can see the wood, but you need a lamb, don't you, for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, these are very clever words. He says, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So it depends how you read that sentence. It gives a very big clue to Isaac, to Yitzchak, as to who is actually going to be offered up. So Yitzchak didn't seem to mind, and he lies down, gets bound, and Abraham stretches up his hand, took the knife, and he's just about to plunge it in when an angel of God calls and says, stop. Do not do that. I believe you. You're the best now. You're wonderful. You would do anything for me. I'm really happy. You're a God-fearing man. So then Abraham lifts up his. By the way, this story is supposed to have happened on Rosh Hashanah. That's another little connection. So what's happening next? Yes, Abraham, as you know, turns around, sees this ram caught in the thorns by a tree. Incidentally, this ram, we are told by the rabbis, was created at the very beginning of time, one of the things that God set aside as a specific creation was this ram. So it was always going to be ready for Abraham to find. And the angel said, now this is the important bit for Rosh Hashanah. I have sworn, says the Lord, that because you've done this thing and didn't withhold your only son, that I will surely bless you, and I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens, as the sand on the sea, and your descendants will inherit the cities of their enemies. So, well, that's important to remember, because we keep asking God to remember that promise. Okay, and your children, it goes on a bit more, they'll be blessed of all the nations. Your children shall be blessed, all the nations of the world. Through your children will be blessed all the nations of the world, because you listened to me. Off he went back to Beersheba, and then we finish off by discovering that Abraham's brother, Nahor, had a wife called Milcah, and they had all these children with lovely names, Uz-Buz, Hazor, Pildash, and Yidlaf, and finally Rebecca. Okay, so there we go. That sets the scenes for the following week's Sidra. So I just wanted to point out then the importance of this story for Rosh Hashanah. Last week we heard that on the first day we're building up to it, but today we are actually coming to the Ikka, the main important bit of the story and how it relates to Rosh Hashanah. So incidentally, the person who's not mentioned in this is the mother, Sarah. Last week she had a starring role. She was mentioned a lot. This week she's not mentioned at all. Does she know? She doesn't know. She finds out. And then when she finds out, we're told that, midrashically, because it doesn't say specifically, we're told that she dies from shock or fear or whatever it was, because next week in the following Sidra, the following chapter rather of this book, which is the following Sidra, it talks about Sarah dying. So she doesn't actually get a mention here, which is interesting. And of course, this whole reading is full of innuendos, and there's loads of interpretations. Did Abraham do the right thing by being prepared to kill his son? Did God do the right thing by encouraging Abraham to do that? Did by doing it and then taking him away? I mean, there's just loads of different directions you can go in, and that's a subject for another time. So there we go. That's the laning, broken down into we call up 5 people on Rosh Hashanah, except on the first day. On the first day, because it's Shabbat, we split the first day's laning into 7 portions. But on Rosh Hashanah and the other festivals, except for Yom Kippur, we have 5 people being called up, Cohen, Levi, and 3 Yisrael. So now we can move to the Haftarah. Incidentally, if you want to look in your own Matzah, I've written down 2 page numbers. One is, they're both for Ashkenazi Matzahs. One is the Art Scroll Haftarah is on page 417, and the Koren is on 741. 741. So last week, if you remember, it was the story of Hannah praying for her child, because she couldn't have babies, connected that with Sarah, who couldn't have children. It was all to do with creating new children. Today, we have a completely different take, and it's from Yirmiyahu, chapter 31, and it talks about God's everlasting love for his people in the future, the ingathering of the exiles. And if you look at the last verse, the very last verse, if you've got it, it says, Haben Yakir li Ephraim im Yeled Sha'ashuim ki midei dabri bo zachor ezkerenu od. That might be familiar to you. It's one of the verses that we say in the Musaf Amida, referring to remember the Musaf Amida is split into three sections, the Zichronot, the Malchiot, and the Shofarot. So in the Zichronot section, when we have 10 verses from the Torah, from Nevi'im, and from the Tehillim, from Psalms, this is one of the verses, and there's a little tune that you may remember, Habein Yakirli Ephraim, Yakirli Ephraim. Yes, well, we won't do the singing, but yeah, so that verse is taken into the Musaf Amida. Also in the Haftarah is a mention of Rachel, of Rachel, who is weeping for the exiled Israelites. And in this Haftarah, God says, dry your tears. There is hope for your future. The children will return to their country. So let's just pause for 1 second, because it's really interesting. I think it's fair to say, well, it's not fair to happen, but it's fair to say that in most of the bits that we use in our Machzor, in our Siddur, the ladies don't get much of a look in. But on Rosh Hashanah, it's really very woman-centric. Women are appearing a lot. So apart from in today's laning, where there isn't a lady, last week we had it in the laning, Sarah had a starring role. In the Haftarah, we had Hannah had a starring role. And here in our Haftarah today, for the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we have another lady who has a good part, who is Rachel. And Rachel had a bit of a rotten life, really. She, if you remember the story, that she ended up dying in childbirth with her second child, and she was buried. You can still see, apparently, where she's buried today, and many of us have been. Yeah, she died young, and she didn't die very happy, and there's a lot of Rachel crying. But because through her tears, we hope to get our own help and salvation. So she pops up quite a lot, and that's included in today's Haftarah. Okay, so that deals with that. Now we're going to move on to the shofar, which, of course, is really the most important bit, because the only bit that's mentioned in the Torah itself. It says, if you remember, we looked at it last time, that this day, the first day of the 7th month, which is Tishrei, even though we think it's the new year, it's Pesach, Nisan is really the new year, but we've adopted a second new year. So the first day of the 7th month, it says in the Torah, you shall blow the something, just this, a day of blowing, which is all a bit weird, but so the shofar is a very important part. And of course, it's become very important as the years have gone by, because that's what a lot of people who don't go to shul so often, if they come to shul, that's really what they're coming to do. They're coming to hear the shofar in many cases, and the children love it, and it is a very important part of the day. But it can't be that important, because as we found out last week, and as I will reiterate, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, when it falls on Shabbat, the rabbis tell us, no, we do not do it on Shabbat, which is a bit surprising because it's so important. But they say no, because there's this risk that someone is going to, the person blowing the shofar is going to forget his shofar, he's going to leave it at home, and he'll run back home and he'll bring it to shul, and maybe there's no Eruv, and then he will have carried on Shabbat, and breaking the rules of Shabbat is a much worse thing to do than blowing the shofar, or not blowing the shofar, whichever way around it is. Yes, not blowing the shofar. Well, there we go. So that's part of the reason why they say Rosh Hashanah is one big day. Then it doesn't matter so much, because if really the second day of Rosh Hashanah is also the first day of Rosh Hashanah, then we are blowing the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So you can make of that whatever you wish. I just want to try and bring up a little doodle that I did, if I can do that. So where's my little doodle? Right. Is it coming? Yes. Wonderful. So this is my interpretation of Judaism. Okay, this triangle represents how the Jewish religion has developed from Bible times to now. I'm going to apply it to the shofar, but you can perhaps apply it to other things. Jeffrey, you mentioned how the Machzor itself has developed from small beginnings to now the massive book that we have, although it has actually reduced in recent years, as it so happens. But this is what happens with the shofar. Go back to the beginning. You've got this little, very simple command, Yom Teruah, the day of blasting. And that word blasting means it must be a horn or a shofar, but it doesn't actually specify, is it a trumpet, is it a ram's horn, whatever. We don't know. Everything else has come from that. And then over the years, all the additional explanations and oh, what did I do wrong? Hang on a sec. I pressed the button I shouldn't have pressed. Help. This is so annoying. Resume. Over the years, the rabbis have added and added and added and added and added and added, and now we've got the following: the shofar rule. These are the basic rules. Last month, we were up north. I think I mentioned last week, 2 weeks ago, in north of Israel, and we went to a shofar factory where they actually make most of the shofars for the world, I suppose. And that was really interesting. And the man there gave me a book, which I haven't really opened the front cover, which is a big book, which tells us all the laws of blowing the shofar. It's all in Hebrew, and I will have a look at one point, but it's just got so incredible what you have to do, what you shouldn't do, what happens. If this happens, what happens, that happens. There are now 4 note names. We have the note called tekiah, which is the normal note, the normal length note. We have shavarim, which is the 3 shorter notes. We have teruah, which is the 9 short staccato notes. And then we have a 4th one, which is really the same as tekiah, but it's tekiah gedolah. So that's the really long one, which we do at the end of Rosh Hashanah, at the end of Yom Kippur, and also at some bits of Rosh Hashanah. How many notes? Well, according to the Torah, it's just the day of blasting. So, I mean, it could just be 1 note. If you have 1 note, you've done it. You've done a bit of shofar blowing. But, of course, that's not what we do now. We're told, however, that it's clear to say 30 notes is deemed to be the minimum number of notes that we should be listening to. Okay, and we'll have a look in a minute at how that's all split up. But if we go to shul, we normally hear 100 notes. Apparently, some shuls do 101 notes. There's lots of rules about how the shofar blower, how does he breathe? Does he break between the notes? Does he have to do them all in one breath? How long should they be? The rules are very, very detailed. And the person blowing the shofar has to know these rules, otherwise he's in danger of getting it wrong. But that good, that I like that. That's now. That's then. Life was much simpler when the Torah was given. So what do we do? Stop the share. Yes, if you want to look in your Machzor and you've got these books, you can find the Koren on page 749 and the Art Scroll on page 432. 432. And I'm going to just point out to you that I think, it is thought that the original place for blowing the shofar was later on, was in Musaf, and it wasn't in Shacharit at all. But what was happening? People, the masses, when they came to the prayers in the synagogue, if they knew the shofar wasn't going to be blown until 12 o'clock, no way that they were going to get there at 10 o'clock in the morning. So they started coming later and later to shul, and the rabbis had to do something about it. What did they do? They brought forward the time of the first blowing of the shofar notes, and they moved the main bit to Shacharit. After the laning has finished and the Haftarah has finished, we then move on to the procedure of blowing the shofar. And we blow the shofar in various places. If you remember, so this major one now at the end of the Haftarah, which is 30 notes. We then have the Musaf section, which, if you remember, is split up into three. There's the bit about remembering, the bit about kingship, the bit about blowing the shofar. At the end of each of them, we blow the shofar in the repetition of the Amidah. And each of them is 10 notes. So that's 3 times. That is 30. So we've got 30 plus 30. And then at the end of Musaf, if you remember, in the Kedusha, we split up the Kedusha. Sorry, I didn't mean to say the Kedusha. I meant to say the Kaddish at the end of Musaf service. We then introduce shofar blowing there. And the remainder 40 notes, every shul does it a bit differently. Some do it in the middle and afterwards, the beginning, the middle. They split it up into 2 groups, normally, of 30 plus 10, which is 40. So if you take the 40 at the end, the 30 in the Amidah, and the 30 at the beginning, you will find that it adds up to 100, which is a nice round number. I will also add that some shuls do it slightly differently in that they blow the shofar in the quiet Amidah. So when the individual is reading his own Amidah in Musaf, they stop or they bang every now and they blow the shofar at the end of each section in the quiet Amidah. So then that means they have another 30, which they take away from the very end, which is left with only 10. So they still end up with 100. But many shuls have decided that doing the banging and the shofar blowing during the quiet Amidah, when you're really supposed to be concentrating, is too disruptive, and they don't do it, and we don't do it in our shul. Okay, so remembering now then, when we start, you can't just start blowing the shofar. I mean, that would be too easy. You have to go through the build-up to make everything more exciting. And we start off with the reader, the shofar blower, the Baal Tekeah. He says Psalm number 30, no, was it 47, isn't it? Psalm 47. He says 7 times, building up to a crescendo. He doesn't. What happens nowadays is he says it quietly and the congregation say it quietly. And the last time, the 7th time, normally we say it all out loud together. And this psalm we add in, as we add in various psalms during Rosh Hashanah, is all about the day, really. It talks about God being the great king over all the earth. What better psalm can there be? And then when it mentions that God is raised up in sound and the voice of the shofar, well, this psalm is made for the occasion. Then the reader, the Baal Tekeah, the person who's going to blow the shofar, then says those verses on the next couple of pages. On Min Hametzah Karati Yah. He reads each of them out loud, again, building up to the actual time when he says the baracha or the brachot, because there's 2 brachot. The first bracha is when he says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar, which means, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe. He's made us holy through his commandments and has commanded us to listen to the voice or the sound of the shofar, which, if you haven't thought about it before, is interesting because the man who's blowing the shofar doesn't actually say bracha for blowing. It's only the bracha for listening. And that goes back to the origin in the Torah when it just says this will be the day of sounding the shofar. So it's only the sound of the shofar that is the mitzvah. There's no commandment to actually blow it, only to hear it. And we also add in the second bracha, which is the Shehechianu, which we do every time we do something new. Even though, so this year there's not a problem because it's on the second day, we haven't blown the shofar yet. But even if we blew it on the first day, we still say the Shehechianu bracha, because if you remember, Rosh Hashanah can be treated as one big day. So we say Shehechianu, but the person blowing the shofar should have in mind, or should be wearing a new garment, or should be having in mind a new fruit he's going to eat, so that to make sure that that bracha is not said in vain. And then we have the list of the shofar blowing order, which you can look at your leisure. Tekiah, Shavarim, Teruah, Tekiah. It's all in nice little groups. And the reason that we have all these different names and notes is because we don't know what is the correct version. It doesn't tell us. God doesn't actually tell us. And the messages that have come down over the years are different. People understood things differently. So in the end of the at the end of the days, we have to do every possible combination we can think of: long notes, medium notes, short notes joined with long notes. What comes first? What comes second? Which group do we do? And we do every possible combination so that we can rest assured that by the end of Rosh Hashanah, we have got at least one of those notes right, and that we fulfilled the command and listened to the shofar. Okay. One other thing I just want to mention about the shofar is that the rabbis are very clever because they've got this first blowing, which is towards the beginning of the service or halfway through, and then the remainder of the blowings take us to the end of the service. And they said, I mean, it's quite right that they say it, that once you say a bracha, and we know that from when we say the bracha, for example, for eating bread, we go through this little performance. We say Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz on Friday night, when we're all waiting, in the days when we used to have people around for dinner. It takes 10 minutes for everyone to wash their hands, and we all sit around the table, and we're all silent, and we all make funny noises, and So why is that? It's because there's not supposed to be any interruption between saying the bracha and doing the action. Okay, no interruption. So the rabbis tell us that because the blowing the shofar is spread over a long period of time, we say one bracha at the beginning, you not allowed to talk in between. You mustn't interrupt the proceedings until you've heard the last note of the shofar. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that rule. So, for example, if you want to explain what's going on, want to talk about something to do with the mitzvah, or if you want to ask someone to pass me the shofar, anything connected with the shofar is okay. But generally, everyone is supposed to keep quiet, which works for about 3 people in shul. But I suppose the other 93 or the other 97 hear what they're supposed to do and then promptly forget it. But it is a little ploy for those that follow the rules properly, keep everyone's mind on davening rather than nattering, which is a good opportunity to just move off and talk about what's going to happen this year, because, again, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier on in proceedings, it looks like a lot of us are not going to be going to shul, because although in theory, the Corona committee have come up with a suggestion that we can actually have more people in shul over Rosh Hashanah. This hasn't been passed yet. It's a suggestion. It's supposed to be 1 person for every 4 square meters. Why is it for every 4 square meters? Because I think if you're supposed to be 2 meters apart from everybody. So if you work it out, that you're 2 meters apart in that direction, 2 meters apart in that direction, 2 times 2 comes to 4 square meters. So that's how they get to their 4 square meters. But they would prefer it that everyone davens outside. And I think they're right, because one of the problems is you're going to have people you don't know. You know, if we go to shul on Shabbat at the moment, although there's only supposed to be 20 people in shul, but at least if the people there, you know them and you know that the likelihood of them having the virus is a bit less. If you suddenly got a lot of people you don't know coming to shul, well, I wouldn't like to be in close confines with them. So the suggestion is we have it outside, and then everyone complains it gets too hot. And some cities have already making great preparations. I was reading in the paper today, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, they're a long way ahead with making preparations for people to use different areas outdoors, parks and open spaces. And the area is going to provide chairs, and they're going to provide cooler fans, and they're going to provide shelter. I haven't seen, they don't mention the town, they list quite a few towns. Netanya isn't mentioned. Whether they are doing anything to help us all out, I don't know. But the theory is that you can have 250 people outdoors in groups of 20, something like that. But of course, we're now up to record levels of infection, and now the schools have gone back. Everyone's predicting it's going to get worse and worse. So we just don't know. But let's assume a lot of us are going to be davening from home, which is one of the purposes of this little course. And we have to make sure, if we can, that we get to hear the sound of the shofar. So if anyone has a shofar of their own, of course, the easiest thing is just to have a little practice before Rosh Hashanah and blow your own shofar, or buy one before. I mean, if you buy a small one, they're not that expensive. And you can actually perform your own mitzvah. You don't have to rely on anyone else at all. You say the bracha, and then you blow as many notes as you can, following the order in the machzor. Alternatively, there was a suggestion, which I think is quite nice, that at 11 o'clock on Rosh Hashanah, all the shofar blowers in the country are going to go outside and blow their 30 notes so that everyone can hopefully hear. But for the people that are members of shuls, it's going to be done, I'm sure, in a different way, in as much as anyone who wants to hear the shofar will be given the opportunity to connect with someone who is able and willing to blow the shofar. So if nothing happens, I'm sure it will, I'm sure Johnny's going to be sorting that out at one point or other, but there are several of us, myself included, him included, Yaki, and there's lots of people who blow the shofar who will be only too pleased to come to blow outside your balcony or come into your apartment area and ensure that everyone fulfills the mitzvah of the shofar, since it is really a central part of the day. Okay, so that is what I want to talk about the shofar. Has any of you got any specific questions that you want to ask at this point about the shofar? Or yes, Jeffrey, let's unmute you. Yes, sir.
Oh. Whether you can hear me.
Yes.
Just a point. In shul morning, there were about 15 men. Rabbi Dr. Johnny Lieberman blew the shofar, and he went to open the door into the sukkah, and the shofar was blown. So the people, the residents of Ramat Poleg, had got a chance to hear the shofar besides the congregants inside the shul. And I thought that was a very generous gesture on Johnny's part. And I think if more shuls were to do that, it might satisfy the need for people to hear the sounding of the shofar. So if the shul were to make, and it's a suggestion which we possibly should put to the Vard of the shul, that public shofar blowing will occur at certain times, then there is a very good chance, in a suitable place, there's a very good chance that people who are anxious to hear the shofar blowing could actually hear it.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant point. And I will just add two things to what you just said. So if that was the 6 o'clock minyan, and we did that, we'd have the area coming round with the guard telling us to shut up. You've woken up all your neighbours, so that's not a good time to do it too early. I suspect that there's a dual reason, and that is that one of the suggestions is that the blowing of the shofar in a shul could be a dangerous thing if the shofar blower has picked up corona, and he blows a shofar in a building in a restricted area, then all that does is goes straight through the shofar, and the corona comes out the other end and whizzes round the whole shul. So doing it outside just lessens that possibility. But it is nice that it gives other people the opportunity to hear. So very good, very good. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next thing, because again, the time just meaningless, isn't it? It whizzes by. The next thing I want to have a quick look at is, before we have a look at customs, is Una Tane Tokef, because we didn't have a chance last week, and I just want to emphasize how important it is. So at this point, I just want to, say at this point that if we're on our own, we have to remember what are the important things. And the important things are just the following. Everything else is built around it and is intended to enhance the main bits. Yeah, it's important to remember that everything is important, but there are some really important bits. So if you start with the important bits, and then you can spread out from there and do some of the other things. So the first important thing on Rosh Hashanah, as on every day, is saying the Shema. 3 paragraphs of the Shema with the 2 barachot before and 1 afterwards as well. So that is one thing we have to make sure we do. The second thing is the Amidah, saying the standing prayer, the Amidah, and that is our private prayer. In your machzor, they've separated out nowadays, not in the old days, but in the newer ones, the private Amidah, and then they have the reader's repetition. So we have to say on Rosh Hashanah the private Amidah, and they're the basic prayers for the day of Rosh Hashanah. We can add in our personal prayers. We can also, when we've finished our Amidah, we can then go to the repetition and flick through and find whichever ones of the addition. There's loads of additional poems and piyutim and extra bits, as we know. That's the bit that lengthens the service, and that's the bit with all the tunes, all the lovely tunes that we know. Go through them at your leisure and choose the ones that you want to look at in a bit more detail. You can try and sing them. You can try and understand what they're meaning. But don't try and be a martyr and try and do everything, because we don't do it in shul. As I was saying earlier on, we don't do that in shul. We rely on the chazan to do the work for us, some of the work at least. All these extra poems, no one reads them all, because sometimes it's the chazan and the congregation responding to each other. Sometimes it's just the chazan, etc., etc. So the Shema we have to do, the private Amidah we have to do, and we have to look at the laning, because that's also a central point of the day, the laning and the Haftarah. Just reading it through, you don't have to do it in Hebrew, it can be done in English. You don't have to do it with the notes, although it's nice if you're able to do it with the notes, please do. The shofar, okay, the shofar is obviously, you've got to hear it. You've got all day to hear it, all day, from first thing in the morning to last thing at night. So don't panic. If you haven't heard it by 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, come and find someone, and one of us that you know is a shofar blower, and we will blow it. As long as it's done by the end of the day, you're fine, absolutely fine. And then, of course, so you do the morning Amidah, and then you do the Musaf Amidah, the additional Amidah. Again, looking in your own time at the additional bits that the Chazan would normally add in, and choosing the bits that you want to say. These are all developed over centuries, and some of them are really quite recent. So there's not a direct connection. It's just getting everyone in the mood and providing the right words for us to enhance our prayers. So I wanted to mention that. So one of the really central prayers in the repetition of the Musaf Amida is Unatana Tokef, which a lot of fuss is made about. It's on page 538 in the Art Scroll, 538 in the Art Scroll, and 801 in the Koren. And Unatana Tokef is why is it? I don't know. It's a really in-depth poem. It's got a really well-written and meaningful music, and it really is. It epitomizes, I suppose, Rosh Hashanah. It tells us what it's all about. And I just want to quickly mention some of the bits behind it. According to Rabbi Sachs, he likens it to the like a Rembrandt or Michelangelo. And the language is simple, the imagery is strong, and there's rhythms and intense drama. And he says there's 4 movements in this piece. The first movement sets the scene. The heavenly court is assembled. If you will listen to Johnny's talk about the first part of Kol Nidre, I think he's got more to say on Sunday. He's saying how Kol Nidre sets the scene. That's what happens here in Unatane Tokeh. It sets the scene, and we're in a courthouse again, and there is God sitting in the seat of judgment. The angels are all around, trembling, and in front of God is the book of our deeds, with our lives written, bearing our signature, and we await the verdict. The second part of the prayer is what is at stake. Who will live? You know these famous words. Who will die? Who will flourish? Who will suffer? Who will be in torment? Who will have a rotten year ahead? Who will have a brilliant year ahead? And it's that period when our future is being decided. Then we have the expression, the third part is how do we improve our chances? And we're told Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah all give us a good chance. And we know that means repenting, praying, and giving tzedakah, giving charity. These are all good things to do all through the year, and especially now, because that helps to change our future, we hope. God forgives, he pardons, he can give clemency if we truly repent and pray and help other people. And then there's a final reflection on the fragility of human life and the eternity of God, how we're just a fragment of pottery, a blade of grass, a flower that fades. We're nothing. We're a bit of dust blowing in the wind, but God is there forever. And just finally to point out what we're looking at, Unatana Tokef, that it was supposedly, well, it's a very old prayer, okay? They found extracts in the Cairo Geniza, which means it goes back a long, long time. But there's this tradition that it was composed in Northern Europe, in Mainz, by Rabbi Amnon, who was pressurized by the bishop in bad times, and he wanted him to convert to Christianity, which he refused to do. And this bishop organized severe punishment, which, depending on in the story you read, either they chopped off his feet, or even more brutally, they chopped off his legs. And this was all at the time of Rosh Hashanah, and his final wish was to be brought into shul. They carried him into shul with all these wounds and bleeding to death, of course. And in his final words, he uttered the words of Unatane Tokef and died, which means it didn't really work for him, did it? but there we go. That's the background to Unatano Tokef, which we say in the Musaf repetition on both days of the festival of Rosh Hashanah. So you won't find it in the private Amida. It's one of the bits that's added on in the repetition. Okay, my final part that I want to look at before we close the book on Rosh Hashanah is some of the customs. And there's quite a lot of them. Some of them we all do, and some of them we sort of smile about. So the first one many of us do is is apple and honey. Yes, apple and honey comes out at night and in the weekend because it symbolizes, we want it to symbolize a sweet year ahead. Apple and honey. And I'll just little deviation here just to make you understand also why we might have apples. And why do we have at Pesach eggs? And why do we have at Shavuot milk? So it just so happens that Rosh Hashanah is also the time when apples are harvested. So there's a lot of apples on the market and they need to be purchased and used. And Pesach will be the time when the chickens are laying the most number of eggs, the beginning of spring. So there's a lot of eggs on the market, and we have to find a way that they can all be purchased and used. And finally, Shavuot. Well, that's the peak time, if you're a cow, to produce milk, because you just had your baby, your calf, and it's been weaned by now, and there's plenty of milk going round. So what better time to use the milk than on Shavuot? That's my take on these customs, but there are, of course, much better reasons than the pure fact that they are available. Because if they, for example, if there was a custom to have on Rosh Hashanah, I don't know, what's something that only grows in the winter? Oranges. If you had to have oranges on Rosh Hashanah, we'd be stuffed because they don't get ripe till January. So we go for apples because they're available. Tashlich, that's a custom, and that's all it is, by the way, but it's really taken hold, and hordes of people will be going out. Normally on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, but it's postponed until the second day of Rosh Hashanah because of the fear of people carrying when they go to perform the ceremony of Tashlich. And we normally do it nowadays in the afternoon, but it can be done at any time, really, on Rosh Hashanah. Even it can be done any time until Hoshana Rabbah, which is the very end of Sukkot, because it's during that whole period till nearly the end of the month of Tishri that God is actually giving us a final chance. So it's not just Rosh Hashanah, doesn't stop then, it carries on for the 10 days of penitence. It carries on, of course, on Yom Kippur. And even then you think, oh, that's the end. No, you've still got a further chance. Hoshana Rabbah is like a mini Yom Kippur. We all wear white again, or the Chazan wears white again. We beat the lulavs, what's going on there? It's all to do with the final opportunity for us to receive a pardon from the Lord above. So let's just talk about Tashlich. So just like on Sukkot, it's going to be the same this year, that on Shabbat, the first day, we don't take the lulav and etrog because of the risk of people carrying it, which they shouldn't be doing on Shabbat. And we, the power of Shabbat overtakes these commands. So we don't have the shofar, we don't have lulav, and we don't have tashlich on Shabbat. What does it mean? It means to cast away your sins. Tashlich, shaliach, or someone who sends. Sending, yeah, shalach lecha. It's connected with that word, shin lamed chet. Cast away your sins. And what do? We go to a river, flowing river. We, who are lucky enough to live in Netanya, go to the sea. And that's a really great place because you can't get better than the sea. It's good to have a body of water with fish. That's what we're told, because the fish have got, no, they don't close their eyes. The eyes are always open, okay? What have I got here? Yeah, their eyes are always open, and we hope that God's eyes will also always be looking out for us. So that's why we do it in a body of water where there are fish. First choice, river or sea. Second choice is a pool or a well. And then if you're at home, what do? Tashlich. Well, don't worry, ladies and gentlemen. The rabbis have thought of that, so you can relax. All you need to do is get a bowl and fill it up with water and say your tashlich. And then afterwards, when you put the bowl of water and you throw it down the sink, well, there we go. It goes into the system, and it goes eventually, after it's been cleaned out, it goes into the rivers and the sea. So you can do tashlich quite happily with your own little bowl if you want to. You don't have to do it because it is a custom, but it's a nice little thing. And if it's meaningful to you, you do not need to be near river or sea. But if you can look out and see the sea in the distance, that's great. First mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, actually, the Jews gathered on Rosh Hashanah in a street by water. So that's where it sort of came from. Abraham had to cross a river, we're told, to get to the Akedah. So we looked at that in detail before. It doesn't say it in the Torah, but the rabbis tell us in their little extra bits that one of the things that God put in his way to try and stop him going, another test, was a river, a big river. It was so deep he couldn't get across, and he had to pray for it to go away, and it did. The next thing is that kings, when they're crowned, apparently, are crowned next to rivers. Okay, going to a riverbank or a seashore, a proper riverbank, not a little sewer or a little trickle of water, but a really decent, if you go to the Yarkon, for example, or a beautiful seascape, I like this one, it's nice. It's awe-inspiring. If you look around and you think about the world, and we contemplate God, and we think about his mercy, because he could so easily flood, as he sometimes does, flood the water over all the land, but normally he doesn't. He's omnipotent, and it sort of gets us in the mood, encourages us to repent. Jewish mysticism equates water with kindness, and we ask God to be kind to us in the new year. And we just hope that he listens. There's this more recent custom that is developed with throwing the breadcrumbs into the water. It's really not the idea of tashlich. It's sort of frowned upon for various reasons, ecological reasons now. No one likes to pollute water sources. And it's not really what we're there for. We're not actually throwing breadcrumbs in the water. It's our sins, and our sins are invisible. Only we know about them. So we shake our clothes and hope that they will all flow away in the water. And now the other customs that have grown up. So we've mentioned apple and honey. We also normally use a round challah, which just trying to ignore that phone. The round challah, which reminds us of the cycle of life, and it reminds us of a crown. If you think of a round challah, you can imagine it's a crown, because this is the day, if we remember, that God is considered as the king. So the crown on his head is the round challah. Some people put raisins in to make them sweet. We don't sleep on Rosh Hashanah, at least on the first day, if we can avoid it, because we want to show that we are setting off on the right foot. And sleeping is not really the best way during the day, although for medical reasons, and if you're really exhausted, you can do. There's no rule says that you mustn't. But if you don't have to, it's nice to just keep going and do things, do a bit of reading and a bit of chatting, walking, whatever it might be. The Chazan on Rosh Hashanah, and some community members, it's mainly the Chazan on Rosh Hashanah, wears a kittel, because it reminds us of That implies that we're sin-free. And of course, we all try and wear our best clothes. Then we've got these other customs which we look at, and some of us do, some of us don't. The head of a fish or a lamb that we put on the table because we want to be at the head of the ear and not at the tail. We have new fruits. We often eat pomegranate because they're just coming into season. And there's lots of other foods that we use, leeks, onions, dates, beetroot, because in Hebrew, they have got double entendre, the double meanings. The Hebrew word can mean two things. And I did find somewhere some nice English puns, which I will tell you about to end this little talk. So you can create your own as well if you want to. We eat raisins to commit to raisin our expectations for a good new year. We want to increase peace, so we can have peas. Increase peace, increase peas. What about some lettuce? Well, yes, why not? Because if we have lettuce, we can say, let us find happiness in the new year. And beetroot, that's often used, and you can do that in English as a pun as well, because we can say, we're eating this beetroot because we want to beat any obstacles that come before us in the new year. Other suggestions will be welcome. And just very finally, to remind everybody that the day after Rosh Hashanah is the fast of Gedalia. It's just during the day, and it commemorates the death at the end of the Jewish autonomy after the destruction of the first temple, when Gedalia was killed by a fellow Jew. It's all a nasty story. But we know the real reason why we fast on the day after Rosh Hashanah, don't we? The real reason is we've eaten far too much on the first 2 days, and this is the best way of getting rid of some unwanted calories and extra weight. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour around Rosh Hashanah. You are welcome during the next couple of weeks. If you've got any things you want to ask me privately, please feel free to let me know, and I don't be embarrassed, and I'm happy to help you in any way with things that you're not sure about. Obviously, you need to have a look before Rosh Hashanah itself, because once the day is there, you're on your own, and you've got to do what you think is best. But what you think is best is actually the most important thing, because it's your Rosh Hashanah. You have to make it work for you in the way that you know best. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording, and if anyone wants to ask a question.
Paul,